Hey guys, how you doing? Greg here. I want to talk a little about assignment number 1. Everybody basically got it and basically understood it. That's great. Okay. What I did was just to talk for a couple minutes about it. I printed out part of what Katie handed in, Corinne handed in, and Courtney. I chose them at random. Okay. And I'm looking at episode 2, the bicycle thief, and how they dealt with the first act of that, the beginning of the first act, just so we can talk about it, or I can talk about it, to give you some examples. Okay. The way Katie phrased it, Act 1, she wrote, all of the dads explain is in caps, what they believe is the key to being a good dad. Okay, fine. I sort of discouraged people from getting too into the interviews, and that may have been why she kept it kind of short. But here, well, let's move on. That's fine. Now, Corinne wrote, Jay attempts, when I put my hand out like that, that's the caps. Jay attempts to answer a question. Cameron delivers long, lofty answers while Mitchell attempts to interject. Phil answers and Claire criticizes his answer. Okay, so what's good about this is when she tells us that Cam delivers long, lofty answers while Mitchell attempts to interject, we're getting a sense of the drama there. We're getting the sense that there's some conflict in the way they're dealing with this stuff, right? That's important. When she says Phil answers and Claire criticizes his answer, we're getting a sense of the drama within that relationship. Like who puts themselves out there and who tends to criticize. Okay? And that's good. That's helpful. If you were to go back, if Corinne was to go back a year from now and look at this, she might gain by looking at it that Claire criticizes Phil a lot, which she does. So that would be useful, especially if Corinne was going to write an entire spec episode of Modern Family, which is something that you might want to do. Okay. Courtney wrote, Jay ponders what the key is to being a great dad. That's true. Cameron cuts off Mitchell by answering his question with freedom. Mitchell answers patience. Okay. Again, she says cuts off Mitchell by answering. The fact that she uses cuts off as the verb there is key. Excuse me, because what she's doing is she's cluing us in to the conflict. Again, that would be very useful if you were to go back over this diagram a year from now, having forgotten the details. You're going to remember who cuts off who, right? Which is useful if you're writing about these characters who habitually do the same things over and over and have the same conflicts over and over. Okay, now go back to Katie. Here's how she deals with the next portion of the script. It's really the next scene. Claire, Phil, and Luke are riding their bikes around the neighborhood. They stop to talk to a neighbor jogging by. Claire badmouths the neighbor once she is gone. Badmouths is the verb in caps. Okay. Now I like that because badmouths is a good, creative, specific term that we know means there's conflict and that she's got an agenda. Okay. Very useful. Okay. Corinne wrote, Claire talks to new neighbor Desiree. Phil invites Desiree over, and Claire vetoes Phil's invitation. Phil nearly crashes into Luke, who rides a girl's bike. Okay? Now, talks and the invites, they're kind of surfacey, but where I'm happiest here, and what I think is best and most useful that Corinne did was vetoes. Okay? Or, you could have said overrules. Very, very useful verb there. Because later on, if I was to look at this, I would remember who overrules who vetoes who in that relationship. Okay, Claire vetoes Phil. That's part of the way their marriage works. So great, that's a good word, good observation. And then Courtney gives us Claire introduces Phil and Luke to the neighbor Desiree. Phil talks to Desiree in an unknowingly creepy way. Phil tells Claire he does not like Luke riding Haley's old bike. And then she goes on to tell us about the interview that happened after that. Okay, what's useful about that Again, telling us somebody talks, that's a little surfacey, but what's useful about that is the fact that he talks to Desiree in an unknowingly creepy way. Okay? You could have even written Phil creeps Desiree out, although I'm not sure Desiree really acknowledges it. So perhaps better would have been Phil attempts to flirt with Desiree, or Phil makes a fool of himself attempting to flirt with Desiree, and maybe you don't think he was attempting to flirt, so you don't want to describe it that way. Maybe you think what he was doing, actually, the way Courtney wrote it, was unknowingly. I think she's probably right. So, there's a number of ways you could phrase that so that later on you understand that Phil is his own worst enemy and that he often embarrasses himself and that there's got to be some action and some conflict. In this case, it's really conflict within himself. It's like you could put Phil shoots himself in the foot trying to be nice to Desiree, whom he's attracted to, right? Phil embarrasses himself if you see it in an active way, Phil makes a fool of himself. So there's a lot of different ways you could write it. All three of these people did a fine job, Katie, Corinne, Courtney. And there's a lot of ways you can specify. The more specific and pungent and memorable verb you can use is generally the best, because then it'll mean something to you if you pick these up a year from now after you've done lots of research and you've learned more about writing and you want to write, if you want to write a Modern Family spec script. You'll need to look at this kind of stuff. This is why this research is so important. And I also want to say, before I end this little vid, that the reason I harp on these verbs is because they show conflict. And I'm talking about dramatic conflict. Dramatic conflict is conflict that matters. Or to use a better term, you've probably heard before, conflict that has stakes. Stakes for the characters in the presentation. Okay? So if Phil says something angry to Jay, it has stakes. If Phil offends Jay, if Phil dismisses Jay, if Phil humiliates Jay, if Phil makes a terrible joke at Jay's expense, all those are basically verbs, actions. It has stakes when we consider that Jay is his father-in-law, that it might make his wife angry at him, or his kids, or that it might hurt Jay, who is a character that we like because he's one of the major characters. So we always consider the stakes. The more the conflict matters, and we'll talk a lot more about this as the course goes on. We primarily focus on the basic rules of dramatic writing, and comedy never breaks those rules. It just executes those rules in a comic way. Okay? So I'm gonna put this where you guys can see it. I'm gonna start a discussion about this general subject matter, assignment 1, and then I'm gonna put another assignment on. Please, please, please always email me everything that you write or come up with, or just a question, to depaulg@newschool.edu. Don't use the Canvas email. I send the Canvas emails out because that's where I have all the outgoing. It's easiest. I can hit it with one button. But don't reply to that. Just go to depaulg@newschool.edu. And then if I want to come back and reply to you specifically, I can just do it from my email if I don't want it to be open to everybody. Okay? Okay, guys? Okay, thanks so much. Talk to you soon.